Right before we jump into this video, if you'd like me to send you a free guide to capturing motion in low light situations, just look for this orange box over on FroKnowsPhoto.com, put your name, email address in it, hit send it, and I'm gonna send you that guide for free. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and this is a real-world preview of the Canon R6 Mark II. Now, it's only been just over 2 years since Canon put out the R5 and the R6, and this is kind of unique and different for Canon to put out what we like to say is a mid-level refresh, because after you hear all of the specs, you're gonna see why we're calling it a mid-level refresh. Kind of similar to what Nikon always did by putting out, say, a D3 and then a D3S. They just added an S to the end of it and made some subtle tweaks, and instead of Canon taking 4 or 5 years to put out a new body, they decided to do the mid-level refresh of this R6 Mark II. Now, the unit that we were using was a pre-production model with pre-production firmware. It is not final, thus why we cannot call this a full review or just call it a review at all, because it is not, because it's not final. Now, all the video shot out on location was done with the R6 Mark II, and it was taken by Steven. So where were we? We were in San Diego, California, where it's like 70 degrees basically every day. So Canon did a press trip where they take out a bunch of YouTubers and press people and bring them to one location, give us the new gear and say, here's some things to shoot. So what did we shoot? We had BMX bikers that were going around a track and jumping over things. They were fun to shoot. Then we had something called an obstacle course. Think of it more like Ninja Warrior style. I did try some of it and I succeeded at getting to the top of the rope. And by getting to the top of the rope, meaning I really didn't actually get to the top of the rope. We had track and field to photograph, we had some tennis players, and we had diving. So there were a ton of things to test this camera out on. And the way that I shot is I wanted to record my electronic viewfinder so that you could see exactly what the camera is seeing, see the autofocusing working, and seeing when I'm taking those pictures. That's why I'm holding the camera the way I'm holding it during the entire time, and that's for you guys so that you can see everything working. And I think that's the best way to get you involved, so you see the autofocusing moving and you see me taking pictures. So here's what I'm gonna answer during this preview. I'm gonna answer is, does it have a stack sensor? What's new about it? How's the AF? There's a new lens to talk about, how many frames per second you get, as well as all of the new video features, because a lot of the upgrades that were done to this camera were based on the video upgrades. So first things first, let's start with the body. It has the same size and same weight. It's basically the same body with some minor tweaks. The same grip works. If you already have an R5 or an R6, the same battery grip for vertical shooting is going to work. That's what I used. I took the one from our R5 and our R6. I took it with us. I plugged it into the bottom of the camera and it worked perfectly. Now there's a new photo video mode dial. It's on the left-hand side of the camera where the on and off switch used to be. The on and off switch has now moved over to the right side of the camera and is up top, and it takes a little bit of muscle memory to break that old muscle memory to get used to where to turn it off and on from, because if you've used an R5 or an R6 for the last 2 years, they've switched it up on us, so that was a little bit different. There's a new joystick on the back of the camera, which I didn't notice much of a difference. Steven said he noticed that he liked it a little bit better. There's some new mode dial options around the mode dial. There's a new digital hot shoe, which comes from the Canon R3. It has the same exact vari-angle touchscreen as well as the EVF. It's the same resolution. There's not that much to talk about those. At this juncture, with all cameras, the EVFs and the screens are all gonna be perfectly fine at this point. And there is also a similar button layout. So if you already have an R5 or an R6, you're gonna notice that the buttons are basically in the same place. Let's move on to the specs, because that's what you guys are waiting to hear about. You want to hear about that stack sensor that's inside of this camera that is not actually inside of this camera, but it does have an all new Canon developed and Canon made 24.2 megapixel full frame sensor. And once again, it is not stacked. It is not the same sensor that you find in the R3. So unlike what they did with the 1DX Mark III and the R6, which shared the same exact sensor, with the stack sensor of the R3, it did not find its way into this camera. And to me, that's fine. Do you expect $6,000 worth of tech in something that's going to be less than $3,000? And the answer is, Steven, No, but a lot of people did. So when the rumors came out, everybody was like, oh, it's going to have a stacked sensor. It's 24 megapixels. Well, it actually doesn't. But the readout speed on this sensor we found to be faster than what was in the R6. Now, it shoots at 12 frames per second with the mechanical, which is the same as before, but now you can squeeze out 40 frames per second with the electronic shutter. Yes, 40 frames per second with the electronic shutter. And how is the rolling shutter when it comes to taking fast action shots? In some cases, good. And in other cases, like when you're shooting a tennis player and they just hit the ball with the racket, you're gonna get some warping and some imperfections. But in track and field, with a subject running directly at me for 80-some shots, we didn't see any issues in that situation. So you are able to squeeze out 40 frames per second with the electronic shutter. It does dumb it down to 12-bit, whereas the 12 frames per second with the mechanical shutter is 14-bit RAW. So I did break out the R3 to shoot some tennis, and yes, the R3 is going to be better when it comes to a stacked sensor. You don't have the same issues because of the fast readout. Now, the R6 Mark II wasn't that far behind, so I think you could squeeze out 40 frames per second depending on the subject that you're shooting and never really see any issues with warping unless it's something moving super fast. And I'm going to show you more images when we dive into the computer so you can see the good, the bad, and the indifferent. Now, keep in mind, you're getting 12 frames mechanical and 40 frames electronic, whereas the Sony a7 IV is only giving you 10 frames per second mechanical and 10 frames per second electronic in JPEG mode and in lossy compressed RAW. So you are squeezing out a lot of frames per second. If I had to choose between a camera, between the Canon and the Sony that I just mentioned, I'm taking the Canon because I love being able to shoot much faster. Like pretty much all of the new Canon cameras, it has a Digic X processor. The native ISO is 100 to 102,400. You've got similar AF to the R3. They're saying it's basically the R3 AF, but because the R3 has a stacked sensor, it's gonna have faster readout and be able to do autofocus even better. I did notice that this autofocus is still fantastic. The autofocus in the R6 Mark II is some of the best autofocus that you will find on the market, especially for the money, even when you compare it to what Sony has put out with their a7 R5 at this point, because I've used them both, and this autofocus is fantastic. Nikon autofocus. Anyway, there's improved deep learning for better tracking. I did notice slight difference. It is faster, it is nicer. Oh, and I did use the new lens. There is a new lens that is a 135 1.8 RF. It is about 2 pounds, just under 1,000 grams, and will cost $2,100. Which is a surprising price because I expected it to be more. We're gonna have a separate review video just for that lens, but I did get to use it on this shoot quite often and shot it at 1.8 while shooting tennis and the BMX bikers, and it does it at 1.8, and it does a fantastic job. And the new 135 also has IS built in. You got the switch on the side, you can turn it on, you can turn it off. Sony does not have that with their 135, and I love that 135 that Sony has, but I'm in love with this new Canon 135. Now, in terms of subject detection, there are some new subjects that they've added here. We've got horses for horsies. If you like horses, you can now track the horse's head better. You have airplanes, because it's gonna track the airplanes, as well as trains. And as a warning and a PSA, if you're shooting trains, stay off the tracks. You don't want to die because you get hit by a train. There is a mode that allows you to do new auto subject detection, meaning the camera's going to select between a horse, a plane, a bird, a person. You set it to that. The Sony, actually, the a7 R5 from Sony could use this because there's like 19 different selection options. It's nice. Nikon also has that option as well. And another new feature that they added was eye selection, where you could tell the camera to select between the left eye or the right eye, meaning it's going to detect that first. And then if you're in a certain mode, you still can just switch eyes just by hitting the joystick. Now, how's the burst mode? If you're someone who likes to just spray and pray and keep your finger down on the button, 110 raw files in the burst mode. That's almost 3 full seconds when you're shooting at 40 frames per second, which is pretty insane. Now, you have the same dual SD card slots. They didn't put in a CF Express Type B card, which kind of would be nice that you have that in the R5. It would be nice to have that here because it's a faster card for transferring, but I didn't outrun run the buffer. I didn't really have any issues there. So you have dual SD card slots right there. Let me jump in here real quick because I want to show you this photo taken with the R6 Mark II and the 135 1.8 and edited with FroPak 3, starting with Zoolander. Boom, looks great. Followed by Winnebago, Prestige Worldwide, November Rain, Mentos, King Contrast, Gotham for People, Eckert, Capone, Canadian Tuxedo, Almost Famous, and Fifth Element. And from FroPak 1, my all-time favorite is Skittles. So boom, one click. So as you can see, if you're looking to speed up your raw workflow for your desktop or on mobile, we created 15 custom Lightroom presets that you can check out right now at FroKnowsPhoto.com/FroPak3. While you're over there, you can play with the sliders to see the befores and the afters. If you decide to pick them up right now, they're currently on sale. Or if you want to save even more and get Skittles from FroPak 1, you can get the triple play bundle, which is FroPak 1, 2, and 3. Now, let's get back to the video. Now would be a good time to dive into the computer to show you the 40 frames per second working and to show you some of the warping you might see with the electronic shutter. So let's jump in right here. I want to remind you that I was using the 135 1.8 at 1.8 to shoot action, fast moving action. So you can see right here, nailed the focus. It tracked her the entire way. And you can tell that because the last image from the burst right here, it's still tracking her. She went up and over that jump and it is following her the entire time. That is a big deal right there. Let me show you this image right here. This is done, of course, at 1.8. They're at a distance. It looks fantastic. Now, this is an easy thing to autofocus on. It just finds the subject. It locks on. Even if they're slightly off the different plane or the same plane from each other, even at 1.8, it's still going to look great. Now, in terms of autofocus, we've got her running underneath this thing on the obstacle course, and the eyes are still in focus, and they're not even looking straight at me. The big thing I want to show you is this. I'm going to select all of these images of this guy running down the track, which was one sequence, not a full burst where I'm holding my finger down, because this is 126 shots. Let me tell you this. When I am shooting, I'm always looking through, but I'm not just doing a burst the entire time, because sometimes I know that I don't want a shot in a certain position or a certain area, so I let it rest, but I still have my finger pressed halfway down, so it's still tracking. That's why I got more than 110 shots in a burst, because I wasn't actually doing a full burst. It's a burst here, relax, burst, get what I need, and move on. So this is the first shot, but I'm gonna hold my finger down here as he's running. You see, you could see where I'm holding at certain moments, but it is nailing the focus. He looks fantastic. Nailed the focus time and time again, even to the point where his head is almost out of the frame. Well, his head is halfway out of the frame. It's still focused 400 millimeter 2.8. And at the very end, I waited and I recomposed as he got closer and closer, because I'm like, well, this will be a good test to see if he is still in focus, and he still is in focus. So that's how good this autofocus is. It tracks him the entire way. But where are the imperfections with the rolling shutter? Because again, those are all shot at 40 frames per second with the electronic shutter, and you don't notice any imperfections or any issues with someone who's running probably at 18-ish miles an hour. I don't know exactly how fast, but the tennis player swinging the racket, this is where you're going to see some issues. You can see the ball slightly warped, but look at the racket. We're 1-to-1. We're at 100% right now. This is the same thing that I saw inside of the R6 when we took it out to the Renaissance Fair and had the bird flying towards me. I saw the same scan lines that were happening. Now, you don't see it on the face, or the hair. You only see it on things that are moving super fast. The ball going out, you're gonna get some warping, all right? You still see the issue here with these scan lines, but for the most part, it's not something that most people would notice. Again, same thing here. Scan lines on the racket, but not on the body or on anything else. The ball going out, yes, that is going to warp. Now with the mechanical shutter, we don't have it, but you're only getting those 12 frames a second. So you have to decide which one is right for you. You don't have those same lines here. So we went from this right here, which is with the electronic shutter, to this with the mechanical shutter, and you see that there's no issues when you go with the mechanical shutter. A couple more examples here. You can see the tennis racket starting to wobble here. That's just because it's super fast motion. But here, after the fact, no issues whatsoever with the electronic shutter. This one, fast moving action, yeah, the tennis racket looks really bad here, but for the most part, most people will never notice that. And for something that doesn't have a stack sensor, it's done a really good job. You see where the imperfections happen, but to have subjects running directly at you when it comes to the track and field and not see the issues is awesome. And you're gonna see the issues slightly, probably in baseball, probably in golf, and maybe in some other sports, but most people will never notice it. So I'm really happy with how it worked. And we'll just finish right here with just showing you Manny Ortiz, because why not show you some Manny Ortiz? Just look at that face and look at that beard. It is perfect. All right, let's continue on with some of the new features. We've got a new RAW burst mode, which starts taking images up to a half a second prior to you shooting. So if your finger is pressed down halfway on the button, it is pre-recording. You take the pictures that you want to take, and after the fact, in the camera, you can dial through and select the exact moment that you want to grab and save it out as a RAW file. No other system is doing this. Some other camera manufacturers let you shoot a lot of frames per second, but they don't do it when it comes to RAW. This allows you to pull out a specific RAW file and save it as a CR3. So in the case of a diver, if I want to get that moment that the diver is going right into the water, then I can go through and select that exact image. And also, it is still using continuous autofocus when you are shooting. Now, it locks in the exposure, but nobody really cares about that. You're still getting continuous autofocus. It's probably not a mode that I'm gonna use very often, but it is nice if you ever need to switch into it. For when you're using the electronic shutter, you do have high frequency flicker mode. I've talked a ton about that in the past. You have a 2x and a 4x digital converter built into the camera. If you want a 2x and 4x convert, just crop it at that point because it's also in JPEG only. There's also a new HDR moving subject mode, which allows you to shoot HDR images even with moving subjects. In the past, you couldn't do that because the subjects would have ended up blurring. So whatever Canon is doing is it's allowing it to work this time. Now, if you're someone who uses the wireless menu in your R6, it's been completely revamped, and you also have a 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, which is upgraded from 2.4 gigahertz. So those are the most important still features to me, as well as what has been upgraded. But what I want to do right now is show you the EVF in action. The best EVF clips that show you things working, maybe show you things not working, but allow you to see the camera out there in the real world, directly seeing exactly what I was seeing at the time of shooting it. Now let's move into the video specs, because that's where a lot of the upgrades from the R6 Mark I go to the R6 Mark II. So we have full width 4K up to 60p, which is oversampled from 6K with no record limit. That's good, no more record limit. Now in terms of overheating, Canon told us that you will get 40 minutes or longer of record time in 60p without running into an overheating situation. Now we didn't run into any overheating situations, and Steven was shooting in 24p. He was shooting for 2 straight days. It was sunny out there, and in the real world situations, shooting me and shooting all the subjects did not run into any overeating. We didn't run into any overeating issues, and we also didn't run into any overheating issues at all. We didn't even get a warning, so I think the overheating thing is a thing of the past. Now, if you want to get a little bit extra reach, you can shoot Super 35 4K up to 60p with pixel binning. Now, in terms of 1080, you can do full width 1080 up to 180p. Now, keep in mind, this is going to be baked in. There's going to be no audio, and the file that you get is going to be baked in and already slowed down. So if you wanted to make changes to it in the future, it's not something that you can change after the fact, but it is baked in. Essentially, it's the same thing that the R5 and the R6 and basically every Canon camera offers. Continuing on to our last page of notes, they limit you once again to 10-bit 422 to only C-Log 3 in H.265. Also, on top of that, you only get IPB compression. You do not get all I. Now, if you want a full cinema camera, go get a full cinema camera. That's not this. But you do get IPB. That's the compression that you get. Now, there's full width 10-bit 6K ProRes RAW, or Super 35 12-bit, which is 3.7K ProRes RAW, video output up to 60p. The original R6 couldn't do RAW output, so now with the Mark II, you can do that RAW output. Now in terms of IBIS, it's the same in the R5 as the R6, and the R6 Mark II continues that on with up to 8 stops of image stabilization. So if you were to pair it with certain lenses like the 135, you'll get up to that 8 stops. Now there's a new focusing mode for video called Detect Only AF. Now what this means is if you're focused on a subject and the subject leaves the frame, it doesn't automatically rack to the background. Now when Steven was using this, he did find that it was a little buggy. So hopefully they take our feedback, and this is something that they make corrections to before they release the final firmware and get the camera out into the world. Now there is a new second Q cinema mode. When you hit movie mode, when you hit the Q button twice, it takes you into this new function, but you can't customize it. So it's kind of similar to what Sony has done with their tiles, but it's not as good because you can't customize it yourself. One of the major issues that some people might have had when shooting video with the R6 is you wanted to take more control over your exposure. And the issue is that it only lets you do full auto or full manual when it came to your exposure for video. Now it's just like the R5, you have more of the control. You could do AV, you could do TV, and still do full auto or full manual. Canon has went ahead and added a pre-record mode for shooting video. Now you'll get up to 5 seconds of it's gonna be recording for 5 seconds, and then you hit record, you're gonna get those 5 seconds. Now in our test, it was buggy as hell, and it just was not usable at the time that we were shooting. A couple of things that Canon added here for video is that you have focus breathing correction, which is similar to the focus breathing compensation that Sony has with their cameras. They also added false colors, which isn't something that I would use, and it's something that you really find in higher end video cameras. If you're one of those tickety-tockety dancers, which I'm not, you now have aspect markers, so when you're shooting, you can see exactly where you need to keep your TikTok dancer so they don't go out of the frame. It makes it much easier when you go ahead and edit your video. Now, in terms of tally lights, there's no tally lights on the front of the camera, but the screen does get a red box when it's on, except for that box blinks, and it is kind of annoying. It should just be on there solid. Let me cut in here to let you know how we are storing and securing our data while we're on the road for an event like we were with Canon. Right here, you can see the SanDisk Professional 2TB Pro G40 SSD. Now, this is a Thunderbolt 3 portable SSD that is rugged. You can see that it has 2 terabytes of storage, up to 2,700 megabytes of read speed a second, 1,900 megabytes a second of write speed. It's bus powered, it's rugged, it's fast, it's water, dust, and shock resistant. That's one that we're using. We also use the SanDisk 4 terabyte Extreme Pro Portable SSD, the version 2. These things are absolutely fantastic. We can store a ton of data. It's so fast at transferring, so it's great for backing up all of your stuff while you're traveling, as well as securing it. So that's what we're using. I showed it to you at B&H. You can pick that up at the link down below. Now, back to the video. So as you can tell, Canon added a lot to the video features. They updated some of the photo things just like we talked about, but what about the price? Is it going to be more expensive, Steven?
No.
You would think that it would be more expensive, but Steven gave it away by saying no right here. They actually kept it the same price as the R6 originally, which was $24.99. So just under $2,500, which is pretty surprising to me because I would expect that they would have added something that said inflation, it's going to be more expensive. So it lends the question, what's the price of the R6 original going to go to? Is it going to drop $100, $200, $500? That is an interesting question because if you're trying to sell your R6 to get an R6 Mark II, you might not get as much money as you once expected to get out of it to roll it into this new camera. Now the question is, do you need to upgrade if you have the original R6? And the answer to that is kind of no. If you're an everyday shooter that is enjoying your R6, which is perfectly fine, you don't really need to upgrade to this. If you're a working pro and you're not gonna get a R3 because you're not gonna spend that money, and this is your money camera, the thing you make money with, then sure, get the new features. If you're someone who shoots video and you want better video features, then this might be the option for you. But the everyday shooter that isn't making money at this or is making a little bit, it's really not imperative that you upgrade. It's one of those mid-level refreshes. But I always say, if you make money at it, roll the money, sell your old camera, sell the one that's 2 years old, roll it into the newest camera, get the newest tech, and grow from there. So what are you gonna do? If you own it, let me know down below. Keep it, sell it, jump ship. What do you think? Let me know. And don't forget that we will go deeper into our trip to San Diego and much more on the next episode of FroKnowsPhoto Raw Talk, which comes out every Friday and is available wherever you get your podcasts. If you got this far, put in hashtag I got this far. Thanks, Jared. And there you have it, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Jared, Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya. Now, the video that you see out on location was filmed with the 6D Mark II by Steven.
R6 Mark II.
Now, all the video that was recorded out on location was done with the... It's an R6. Now, all the video that you see out on location was filmed with the Canon 6D Mark... What the f*** is it called? Do you need to upgrade if you have the original 6D? And... Let me jump in here real quick because I want to show you this photo taken with the 6D Mark II. No, it's an R6 Mark II. Let me jump in here real quick because I want to show you this photo taken with the 6D Mark II. 6D Mark II? I did it again. It's an R6 Mark II.